was taken out later.
Yes.
Would you recommend that that be left out or replaced?
I would recommend strongly that it be left out. I opposed it initially. Interesting case studies, which they circularize throughout the country to all mayors when they find some program, for example, in Chicago that's particularly effective. This information is transmitted. It's called the urban observatories, in which much of this information, not just in the area of poverty, but the whole field of urban affairs, would be collected and at the same time transmitted throughout the country through the utilization of various urban universities across the country.
Through agreement about the desirability of income maintenance than we are to a feasible way of providing it. Some form of experimentation, carefully devised, geographically selected, seems essential. Question, is the poverty program being considered as a vehicle for such experimentation, and shouldn't it? Similarly, national sentiment seems to be moving towards broader and more flexible grants and shared taxes, revenues, from the federal government to the states and local units. Yet the poverty program is tending in the opposite direction, from the general to the categorical, from the discretionary to earmarked funds. Should such be the case?
Now, did you have a chance to see or look at the newspaper accounts of the testimony we had on Monday when we asked these 5 representatives of the poor from all over the country what they thought about income maintenance? And I think there were 2 of them for it and 3 of them against it. And this is, to my way of thinking, symbolic of the difficulties in a democracy as to how you're going to move into a new area of this sort. I would say as a politician that we're many years away from income maintenance today. Perhaps I'm wrong. You are already convinced intellectually that it's a good thing in principle. How do we bridge that gap in a democracy?
I am not necessarily yet, Senator, convinced, but I think the program, the Community Action Program and the poverty program itself were created by a number of us to be a research and development operation for the nation on these problems. And I think that when you get ideas with growing consent, like the income maintenance program, it would be very healthy if we could experiment before we break it on the country generally. And I suspect probably in the reactions you got on Monday, you got some of this surprise, that is, not having heard about it before, not having tested it out. It's pretty hard to respond with much forethought or much judgment. And we think that if we could use community action as a way in a few selected places, not just with local staff, but with federal agencies and some of our major economists working with us, we might be able to test out, does it make sense or does it not make sense? But we need the flexibility to make a test of that kind.
My colleagues will speak for themselves, but I suspect they'd agree with me that income maintenance plan as of today is not a practical political reality or possibility.
I wouldn't disagree, but I do think it would be helpful to you, perhaps, we would think so, if some of us might test it, if we could find political support in our own jurisdictions to do so.
May I say, Mr. Chairman? I divide this into 3 general areas. One is a definition of the need that exists now in the state. 2, some brief description of key existing federal programs and their inadequacies. And 3, where we need to go and the need for federal action, greater and a more affirmative federal action in meeting the causes and the needs of poverty in the state. After 2 civil rights bills in the 3rd year of the poverty bill's operation, the situation of the Negro in Mississippi is that he's poorer than he was, he has less housing, he's as badly educated, he's almost in despair. We face now a major crisis in the Mississippi Delta as a result of minimum wage, which I think Mr. Carr spoke to you about earlier. One of the sad things is that none of us know really the extent of the poverty and the dislocation that's resulted from mechanization and from the minimum wage bill.
Ms. Wright, did you hear Mr. Carr testify?
I read Mr. Carr's testimony.
Were you impressed with it?
I agree with some of it. I think that he did not, again, go into the dimensions of this, and I'd like to sort of add some additional
Yes, I think in the
statements.
course of what you tell us this morning, you might comment to the extent you think it desirable on his presentation.
Yes, sir. Well, as he pointed out, there has been a gradual trend in the Delta toward mechanization, and right now, those people who had only the skills of chopping and picking cotton have absolutely nothing to do. And the Delta Council of the Mississippi Plantation Owners estimates, according to a New York Times article recently, that approximately 8,000 families were dislocated as a result of minimum wage and the ending effects of mechanization. Now, this is a tragic kind of situation. We don't really know how many people are involved. I'm told that a recent study, which is going to be released, says about 54,000 people. Again, one of the things we've been trying to get but have been unsuccessful in getting.
Stop just a minute. You're giving us some very valuable testimony. I'm just a little worried. You're going so fast, the stenographer's not getting it all. How about that?
All right. I will try to slow down.
I know, it's cruel and barbarous treatment. We all know it.
None of us are completely clear about the dimensions of this problem. We know it's huge. And one of the things we've been seeking without success is to get some federal agency to do a comprehensive study of the extent of dislocation as a result of minimum wage and mechanization. I think that is an immediate need. Now, what are we going to do with these people? Frankly, I don't know. Here you have a number of people who've never had any skills, who are basically illiterate in large part, who have little housing, absolutely no place to go, no jobs, and no hopes of getting any. Now, this problem has got to be faced. The single largest problem facing all of us in Mississippi right now is how can people eat during the winter? The begging, the meetings that we're holding where numbers of people come and we ask them to stand up and almost nobody in that meeting of hundreds have jobs or have any hopes of getting jobs. This is an urgent situation which must be looked into and which must be met.
What's being done at the local level?
All right. Now, that goes into one of the existing programs which is key. Last year, in the last couple of years, one has had a free commodity distribution plan. One sees an increasing trend in Mississippi toward food stamps. This is causing a major crisis just in meeting the hunger problem. As a result of this, one finds, say, in Jones County, for instance, which these are Civil Rights Commission reports which have gotten figures from the Department of Agriculture, but in Jones County, for instance, participation dropped from about 17,500 people who were on food commodities to a little under 4,700 in March. Now, let me translate this into human terms, and this trend goes on in several other counties, and I'd like to submit some of this data for this committee so that you can look at the impact of food stamps on people who were on food commodities. Let's translate this to people who have no income. Take one example of a woman in LaFleur County with 6 children, absolutely no income. She has not worked. She was cut off welfare, and we think illegally. But she simply cannot feed her kids because she was totally dependent on food commodities for that existence. She cannot afford the minimum amount for food stamps. Let's take the second example of a woman in Washington County who is a welfare recipient, who makes approximately $60 a month, who has 7 children, who has to pay rent, light, water, and who cannot meet the minimal requirements of food stamps. And asking several of the people in the state what responses they're going to make to this kind of situation, the only thing they can say is, I guess they'll have to starve. Now, this is absolutely untenable. Nothing that I see in the law requires that there be a financial requirement for food stamps. And somehow, some adjustment in the regulations of the food stamp program must be made to aid and provide food for those people who cannot afford it and who have no income or little income at all.
Well, now, if that were to occur, I would think almost anywhere else in the country, those people go on public assistance. Is there no public assistance in that area?
Yes, sir, that's my next issue, and I brought for the committee a report that we have done in starting to examine federal programs in the state. Mississippi welfare programs are terribly inadequate. Mississippi determines what need is and decides they'll give the recipients 31% of that need. Now, you take that, and that's an increase from 26% in the last 6 months to the 31% level now. So even if one is on welfare, that's terribly inadequate to survive on.
Can you give us some rough idea in terms of dollars a week for, say, a family of 4 or a family of 8, whatever it might be, what that assistance at the state and local level would be?
The maximum, say ADC, which is the maximum program, which is the major welfare program in Mississippi.
Aide-dependent children.
Aide-dependent children. The maximum anybody can get with I don't care how many children is $90 a month. Now, the average payment for one child is $9 a month, and this sort of increases with other children, but up to the limit of $90. I have, and this is all documented for the committee, a detailed study of welfare assistance, the levels of payments, and the maladministration, which is the next point. Because even with the 31%, many people who should be getting that aren't getting it. And we have been able to document and have before for this committee today. Can you understand me, or am I still going too rapidly?
Well, I understand. I'm just worried about this.
The court reporter?
See, we'd like to preserve this for posterity.
Yes, sir. Quite apart from the 31% inadequacy.
31% of need.
Of need inadequacy,
And
right.
I imagine the determination of need.
Perpetuating the cycle of poverty in the state of Mississippi. How is that? One is that, just look at the employment figures. I'll take 3 or 4 key federal programs, Employment Security Commission, where we have numerous complaints every day of discriminatory referrals, and at most what Negroes can get by going to the Employment Security Office is the same old domestic type jobs. The employment of Negroes in this program, which is 100% federally assisted, can be counted, those above janitor or maids of that kind, can be counted on one hand. The Welfare Department employment practices are almost non-existent as it applies to Negroes, and you find almost no Negroes existing in these programs.
Are there Negroes in the welfare department?
Very, very few, and we've been trying again to get this kind of information. I have never seen there are few welfare social workers in a place like Jackson, but in the overwhelming number of counties, there's not a single Negro employed, either in the Employment Security Office or in the Welfare Department, in any position above janitor. The Agriculture Department, again, which has a tremendous amount of influence in programs, is on the whole still basically segregated both in services and in its own employment practices. Almost no federal agency has begun to approximate compliance requirements of Title VI. There's an immediate need for a review of these programs in terms of Title VI to see, 1, they're reaching the people for whom they're intended to serve, 2, that they employ people on equal basis. The Extension Service discrimination and segregation, which was documented by the Civil Rights Commission report, has exchanged very little. And the administration of these programs must be looked into and to assure that everybody's going to get the benefits that they're entitled to get. One can look at schools and HEW compliance practices, and we see in Mississippi today, after 12 years of Brown and after numerous school desegregation cases, very few Negro children in white schools. And again...
Stop for just a second. I want to make a brief statement off the record. I apologize for eating my lunch while you're testifying, but I have another appointment I must go to. I'm afraid it'll be before you get through, and I thought you wouldn't mind if I just munched while you went ahead. Back on the record.
Let's move to the poverty program, because for many people the poverty program held out the largest hope. And I think it's also held out the largest disappointment in many ways. I agree very much with most of the basic articulated goals of the poverty program, and I certainly support the concept of community action. But in examining how these are actually functioning in Mississippi, one sees several trends. One does not see cap structures which are representative or democratic in any real way. One finds that the money and the cap boards are going through the very same power structures that created or helped create the poverty problem in the first place. Too often, I think there's been an assumption by the OEO that any Negro represents poor people, and this is not true. Unless the concept of democratically elected representatives is implemented in the state of Mississippi, we're going to continue to see middle-class Negroes picked by white boards of supervisors, put on cap boards, mainly for their effectiveness in parroting the white community. There must be democratically elected boards which are representative of the poor, and OEO's cap boards are falling far below these standards today.
Now, Mr. Carr told us, as I remember it, that the Negroes in the Delta area...
Here is also a county where you have strong Negro leadership, a strong traditional NAACP chapter, but in those Delta counties which are one poorer, where there's less organization, there's still a huge amount of fear. There's still the huge amount of economic dependence on the white power structure, on the plantation owners, and we're making very little inroads in the right to vote. And again, the key to that is some kind of hope in terms of federal programs which are going to feed development more as a response to the few independent poverty programs that have come up, and more out of desire to control the poverty funds that are coming to that community rather than a commitment to poverty. I think the community action concept has been based on the assumption that there are many separate groups in the community who are interested in eradicating poverty, but I think that the whole experience of Mississippi defies that. You have 2 very distinct communities, white and Negro, who have been at loggerheads. All right? Who have been at loggerheads. And some kind of processes must be designed to ensure the cap structures which are formulated do represent the entire community. And there are many ways to do this, I think. One is that I think the openness requirement, which is provided in the Office of Education, the Economic Opportunity Act, is a good one. but in fact is not being used, and people in the local communities, poor, Negroes, and whites, are not getting the information regarding these programs. They must have open policies. It takes a lot of guts for the average poor Negro in the rural Mississippi County to go and request a copy of the proposal, and so often they're turned down. OEO must assure that information is going to be disseminated to all elements of the community so they can be aware. Too often what we've seen is that cap structures have come up, have been there, have already had their representatives chosen, and people have had no involvement. As a result, many Negroes have refused to participate in these cap structures because they felt they've not represented them, and two, they've seen those people on the cap boards who've been their enemies traditionally in past years. And let's take Sunflower County, for example, where the sheriff of the county was sort of temporary chairman of the cap board, and this is a sheriff that we have been able to document, which the Civil Rights Commission reports documented, had traditionally been hostile to Negro citizens. Great pressure has been put on OEO again and again to reorganize these cap structures, and OEO is making some effort in that direction. The Negro community pending this action in their recent hearings, we don't need training in washing dishes or in pushing brooms. Same thing happened down in Simpson County, where we had witnesses come before the Civil Rights Commission to say they were in a work experience program. They had signed up for office work in some of the local public.
Have you faced the issue of rather having no program than having it this way? Because that's what we're constantly under the gun of here. That if you don't want it this way, you're not going to have it at all, because you have to deal through a governmental structure which is loaded against you. The OEO admits that. So the only thing you can do is deny them funds under 6. You cannot, according to them, and I'm not so sure, I'm not passing on that now, install your own poverty administration in Mississippi of people outside of Mississippi with a mixture of also those who are the poor themselves and who are being abused. Now, what's your attitude on that? Would you rather not have it at all? Let's face the stark issue that there can be no poverty program in Mississippi because it's rife with immorality and segregation.
Mr. Senator, I'd like to answer it this way. If the poverty program is going to function, with the exception of the few independent programs that have come into the state as they have functioned so far, that has been just meant that much more money being given to the power structures to buy off that many more people. And it just strengthens those forces which we're trying to get rid of. So unless there's going to be real implementation of guidelines, then one could make a strong argument, or one is hard to defend, having additional poverty money come in for the use of the very same traditional people who've kept Negroes down. However, I see and have seen from our own experience in certain independent programs that the poverty program can work if few people are willing to take enough of the risk to finance or help independent programs, either through single purpose programs or through helping people at least get better and more democratic cap structures in those cap communities. Much more effort can be made to implement the guidelines and has been made. I think the OEO task force has come in after 2 years and made some few changes, which if pushed further, I think could result in some communities in effective community action. Other than that, I think there has to be a much greater concentration on single-purpose programs and on helping rather than, again, bowing to the political pressure which seeks to kill those independent programs. I would hate to say that poverty programs should stop, because it's our last hope in many ways of trying to build up the kind of community pride and the community organization that's going to get these people out of the very cycles they're in. We've got to do something for them. We've got to continue to support independent programs, and we've got to have greater policing and evaluation, and I think it can be done. I think a few programs have shown that it can be done. And I think what one has gotten now is that the Negro community has seen that they can run some few programs well. And there is some hope that if they get training, they can progress. And they do see now that they can change their lives in certain fundamental ways as a result of having achieved information through some of these poverty programs that they never had before, but they aren't willing to give that up. I think that the obligation for implementation is there, and I think the poverty program should be increased and should be, again, allowed in those independent programs where people will be allowed a chance to develop.
Where are you going to find the local leadership?
It's tough. We're going to have to train it. That's one of the main points of why you've got to have the kind of poverty programs where the poor themselves are allowed chances to develop, to get the kind of training so that when they sit on cap boards, they can compete on an intelligent basis. And that means time. That means, making mistakes.
Who's going to train them in Mississippi?
All right, that's another good question. We don't really know. I think there should be, and there is available, and we've seen this in a few of our independent programs, a tremendous amount of outside technical assistance, which is willing to come into Mississippi and provide some of the technical know-how and some of the training programs that we don't have.
But that outside leadership is resented, is it not?
It's resented, but again, as long as there are no viable alternatives, I think our commitment to our goals impel us to go ahead and get it. Mississippi itself.
If the chair would allow me, it is resented. We know that. And Mississippi is a mighty dangerous place, though. It's one of the 50 states, from what you say and what other things we know. But nonetheless, is it practical? Can it be done despite the resentment?
It is.
Or has it gotten to the point, or are we still at the point where a person's life's in danger if there is resentment?
Life's still in danger, Senator, but that's one of the risks that many people are still willing to take, and you still see a number of outsiders in the state of Mississippi. I'm an outsider. The director of the Child Development Group of Mississippi is an outsider. Many of the people in structured poverty programs, because of the lack of available technically skilled people, are from the outside.
I'd like you to speak, if you're willing to, and don't if you don't want to, a little bit about your own experiences down there, what extent you have felt that you were under threat, the extent to which you were able to be effective. What happens to a girl like you from the Yale Law School who goes down to Mississippi and tries to take on this? Would you rather not talk about it? Don't.
Well, I don't mind. And again, I don't. My experience is almost nothing compared to the kinds of experiences that local people who live there have to go through.
Yeah, but you're the only witness we've got.
I'm the only witness you've got, and on the whole, Mississippi's not been a very pleasant place. But I went to Mississippi knowing certain problems when I got there, and this isn't a real everyday thing in my life. You do it, you take certain risks, and that's that. There is violence, but your expectations, I guess, are there so that it doesn't shock you terribly much. There's a tremendous amount of harassment of me, but more of local people. And again, I think that is going to have to be the major concern. And I think what has kept me going is the one that I have been very welcomed and very much felt needed by the Negro community, because there are only 5 Negro lawyers in the state. And again,
There are only 5 Negro lawyers?
there are only 5 Negro lawyers in
the
the state,
state?
on the entire state, and 2 of those never went to law school, and only one of us is a full-time civil rights lawyer. But again, you put your hand on a key point. I mean, while all of us outsiders have had rough times, we're still alive. There are certain risks, again, that people take, and some people have been less fortunate. Again, I would always emphasize the need for stronger federal implementation of people's rights and protection of people, and this new legislation which is up before the Congress to protect civil rights workers and others from violence, I think, is a crucial thing. Because the right to vote doesn't mean a cotton-picking thing if people are going to have to sort of risk losing jobs, risk getting shot in order to exercise that right. So I would urge the Congress's consideration of that bill. But getting back to the poverty-type problem, we've got to sort of meet the needs of the Delta. We talk about the urban ghetto, and the whole country now is focusing on what we can do about the urban ghetto, and it's nothing more than the failure of Mississippi, Alabama, and other southern states to do their jobs 15, 20, 30 years ago. Something has to be done to keep people there, provide opportunities for them there, because most of these people don't have enough education to read the signs of the unemployment office, even if they go there. And I can't think of a northern ghetto that has enough room for 50,000 people or 20,000 people or even 10,000 people. And these people are attached to Mississippi. And unfortunately, one sees evidences of a state policy which is intended to make things so bad that people will have to leave. That's why I think that we've had indications that welfare payments are so low. Yes, sir.
Mr. Carr, when he was here, if I remember his testimony correctly, seemed to suggest or bordering states and acquire jobs. Now, you don't seem to share his.
Oh, I think many of these slots. One also sees several criticisms of people who go through training programs don't have jobs afterwards, and there seems to be a lack of coordination.
Employment security in Mississippi, the state agency which is supposed to find jobs for people. Do you know anything about that at all?
They're supposed to find jobs for people, and I can find the Greenville Air Base as a site for a community where you can experiment in new training directly to new industry that's brought in on a small basis, but this has to be done on a much wider basis. And I think that if they are existing, there could be much greater use of training programs that exist now. There has to be more training slots available. And thirdly, they have to be related to job opportunities. And four, more effort must be done to recruit more industries into Mississippi, which won't come as long as you have this wasted labor supply, which is just sitting there waiting for something to do.
Miss Wright, is there also a poor white community in
Representation of poor Negroes on capped boards, the poor white is almost non-represented anywhere, and the poverty program, I feel, has almost not touched him.
Well, now, is the poor white also a party to this hostility and resentment?
Well, he's the most hostile senator because he's the guy that's got to compete with the Negro. He thinks for jobs. And again, he has been taught that the only way he's going to be able to get up anyway in a society is sort of to keep the Negro down. That you find traditionally the largest amount of anti-Negro feeling among the poor whites, where traditionally if one could really talk about economic issues and the need for us to build a new kind of coalition of poor whites and Negroes, it would be very valuable. But unfortunately, these are our largest clan elements, and these are the people, again, who are terribly poor but have no leadership. And unfortunately, they've been used to perpetuate the status quo by the middle class or upper class whites. We don't know how to break that syndrome. In CDGM, we went out and made great recruitment efforts to involve some poor white children in our Head Start programs, mainly because we did want to desegregate, and this was a requirement of OEO guidelines. We got a few, to our surprise, even in rural areas. We got a few white parents who began to see the Negroes got all that money over there, so we must be missing something, to come into the program. But they lasted a week because of harassment from the white community. I don't know how you're going to be able to break into that or to protect those few who are willing to step out because they cannot sustain the social hostility in their own community.
Now, let me interrupt you for just a moment, and I want to go off the record. I've got
And then at least Miss Wright will have some structure of the way she presents.
Well, the only thing that bothers me is that we're pushing this stenographer pretty close to exhaustion. We really are. I'm not kidding.
I'll be glad, Senator, to sort of outline in a written form my statements, and I do apologize.
I think
like
that
that.
would be most
All right.
helpful, and add
I'm
anything
sorry.
else that you wish.
I'd like to, unless you gentlemen strongly
No,
object,
I-
I'd like to exercise my prerogative as chairman and
Well,
tell the
if
stenographer not to
stenographer's
try to
being
take
pressed,
it.
there's no point.
And you give it to us later. But now you go ahead and talk right now, just fast as you want, because I'm just as much interested in this as these others. I think your testimony is absolutely fascinating.
All right, just in terms of the poverty program itself, I just urge, because we do need far more, and the poverty program so far has not scratched the surface of the need and has not begun to meet the problems of these dislocated workers, that this should be increased. Secondly, I was very... All right.
Pull it up closer to you. I'm sorry to be so tough on you, but
That's okay.
it's a problem of communication.
Even the Mississippi judges understand me better, I guess. It's the...
Maybe that's on account of you talk more like them than you do like a damn Yankee.
The second thing that I was disturbed about in the President's State of the Union, and what I sense is an increasing tie with the local state governments, and that frightens me because the only hope we've got in the poor Negro community to develop is to have independent programs. And if there's an increasing trend toward working through state agencies, then the poverty program, I would say, should end, Senator, because we're going to be trapped back into the old syndrome with state agencies. I cannot agree more with the need for a follow-up program because what we're concerned with now is what's going to happen to our children in the first and second and third grades, going into bad schools, learning things that we've tried to get them away from learning in the Head Start programs. There should be follow-up, but I agree that this follow-up should also be allowed for independent groups and not go exclusively through local school boards. And I will get for this committee the recent study done by the Mississippi Research and Development Institute, programs for training and for jobs and for housing. And there has got to be greater federal supervision and evaluation of its programs to make sure that what we write in our laws will exist in fact for many people. And that isn't true at the present time of our existing federal programs, including the poverty program. But there is great hope, and I think that we would all urge that it be supported and that it be strengthened. I think lastly, I think that one of the things that we sense most in Mississippi, which is of most problem to us, is that we sense a feeling in the country now of going back to where it was, and that while we've only scratched the surface, the country's already tired. I would like to see from this Congress some real commitment to the concept of eradicating poverty, so that our federal agencies don't always tell us down there that we don't know what we can do or we're scared to do this or that. I hope that this Congress will come out with a strong commitment to an increase in the poverty bill, and clearly define guidelines so that the poor can know what is expected of them and what they can expect from you.
I think that I think I speak for my colleagues when I say...
Thank you very much, dear, for being with us, and you've been very illuminating. Give us a written statement. We'll really do our utmost to make your visit profitable.
And add anything else to it that you wish.
Thank you so much. Committee will be in recess until 9:30 tomorrow morning.